Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another FNAF reaction stream. And as you can see on tap for today, we want to figure out what is the true goal of the Mimic. From FNAF Secret of the Mimic, FNAF Ruin DLC, which is the first time the Mimic has ever been shown in the actual game instead of just book form. And before we dive into the video, I'm just gonna give my headcanon, just shoot my shot out there. Whether this is a layup or full court shot blindfolded, I'm just gonna give my idea, my assumption, my opinion, my prediction, and what the true goal of the Mimic is. In my opinion, the true goal of the Mimic is in the name. It's to mimic things. We know from the books and everything, and we also know from Endgame dialogue from Secret of the Mimic, how the Mimic was created by Edwin Murray, and it's designed to mimic anything it sees and also fit into any costume that it sees, right? That's the whole plot of Secret of the Mimic. But we also know that Secret of the Mimic, or at least in mimic form, based on these games, is the point of the Mimic is at least, how do I say this? Can you tell we're at the beginning of the stream? So I'm trying to put, ramble and try to put all my thoughts together. You find downloaded See the Mimic? W's in chat. First of all, welcome to my stream. I don't think I've seen you in my stream before, so welcome. Hi. As you can see, big FNAF fan. But anyways, as I was talking, so if we are going off the assumption that stuff like, at least in my opinion, Glitch Trap is a form of a Mimic. The Mimic we see in Security Breach, Ruin DLC, and then in Secret of the Mimic itself, it seems like there's a parallel. And the parallel is the Mimic is constantly trapped, and it's constantly having to find its way to get out, right? In Glitch Trap's case, once again, I'm going with the opinion, the interpretation, the assumption that I've always gone through, that Glitch Trap, the glitching virus that is scanning the computer chip by Fazbear Entertainment in FNAF Help Wanted, the VR game, is a Mimic. It's designed to mimic the image and likeness of William Afton. And that whole point of the game is for you to assemble the 16 cassette tapes you see throughout the game, and those cassette tapes get Glitch Trap, the entity, closer and closer to the player character until it either possesses their body, has you play the pizza party minigame where it lures you into the pizzeria back room and kills you and then stuffs you inside a Freddy suit. Basically getting off the impression that no matter how you play the game and everything, it's designed to have Glitch Trap win and for you to fall under them. And then in Ruin's case, the whole point of the game is for Cassia to go throughout the pizza plets and disable the security nodes. Eventually, them disable the security nodes releases the Mimic, and they're able to roam freely underneath the pizza plets. The security nodes were keeping them through the Mrs. machine, were keeping them locked away and keeping them at bay. But now that Cassie unlocked all security nodes, there was nothing preventing the Mimic from roaming around freely. And then to get the Mimic, if we are going off the assumption that just the base game, you playing through the game normally, getting the executive access, and then putting the data diver into that collection tool mechanic, if we assume that's the base ending, the canon ending, the Mimic now has the data diver with the executive access. So they're able to run freely, they're able to create endless mimics and go on a rampage. There's nothing stopping them because, for easiest assumption, they now have the executive access to do whatever they want. So that's my opinion. That's my assumption before I even hit a second in the video. The true goal of the Mimic is having this constant thread of being locked away and find some way to be released or set free, unleash chaos, something in that regard. That's my opinion for the true goal. All right, here we go.
The modern timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's is a drastic battle between two opposing forces. On one side, the side we've known, is Glitchtrap, or Malhare, a variant of the Mimic that William Afton personally trained on himself to continue his legacy should his flesh ever fail him. The other side, M1, or Fiona, is the original Mimic trained on the late wife of its inventor, Edwin Murray, now with only one goal: bringing her son back. Both sides are desperately vying for control over the Mimic, an endoskeleton trapped in a pizzeria underneath the Mega Pizzaplex. But what does the Mimic want? Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. So what is that thing in the basement of the Pizzaplex? The Mimic is an interesting character, especially by this time of Ruin. It's an endoskeleton that we've never seen before, and it frankly looks like it's made up of several other endoskeletons. The parts are all mismatched. It's very clearly acting like a variant of the original Mimic schematics, but if so, which one is it? And is this endoskeleton somehow the old one? Well, as we get into it, let me briefly go over the theory that sets the stage for this entire video.
Sorry, skipping the ad. Sorry, the stream is non-spawn. Okay, there we go.
Okay, maybe I'm gonna have to worry about skeletons.
Back to rigor schedule program, everyone.
Mimic custody, or rather Springer Trap, is the theory I posited last week. It's the idea I opened this video with. If you want all of its details and arguments, you can watch last week's video right here, but very briefly, let me touch on the essentials connecting the two games, as they're very important for today's theory. M1 is the original variant of the Mimic schematics. It was trained on Fiona Murray, a puppeteer who was the wife of Edwin and mother of David. After she died during a fall fest, Edwin began training M1 on the data he had collected of Fiona, recordings, audio tapes, and the like, so that M1 could be a better caretaker for David while Edwin worked. M1 began copying Fiona to such a degree that Edwin began referring to her as Fiona, even though she looked like this. But it's okay. Even though her endoskeleton is chopped, her digital persona is Mother. But at some point in the process of trying to make M2 a successful copy of the program, Edwin was fully stuck, and M1 was placed inside a mechanical X-Form experimental storage, or specifically her version of it, F10N4, so that her personality and persona could be kept safe while he put M2 into the Mimic endoskeleton, hoping that having a body would be the piece he needed. As far as we're aware, M1 never leaves the F10N4 machine and is still in there to this day.
Which is bizarre, because ever since I saw Fiona the wife be now F10N4 and being, for lack of a better term, an early version of the Mrs. Machine from Security Breach Ruin, my head was going in all sorts of directions, rambling nonstop, because true FNAF form, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Because the concept and idea of Fiona, F10N4, and the Mitzes, if by opinion, they're polar opposites. You have Fiona's case, M1, who is pushing Edwin to make M2, is pushing potentially, in the last video, or at least one of the last videos we did, being more of a villain, being more of an antagonistic threat. At least there's a theory floating around out there that Fiona is the one that inevitably led to David's death because they wanted their own son, but in robot form. Right? That's the whole goal, is putting their family back together in robot form, since, they're the only robot here and they want their own family. Right? A mother does what a mother does. And that's all fine and good. And I understand that, and I don't disagree there. But then you get to Mitz's from Security Breach Ruin, the Blue Bunny character we see, and they're now completely different. Mitsis is a security breach protocol that is designed to prevent Cassie from shutting down the security nodes. Like, that's their whole point. Like, you're playing through the game of Security Breach Ruin, and you think, oh, this Blue Bunny character is preventing you from shutting down security nodes. Oh, they're a villain. Oh, they're antagonistic. Oh, they're a threat. Oh, you have to be worried about them. But if you really stop and think about it, you're not hearing Gregory throughout the course of the game. And Cassie, as we now know, is shutting down all the security nodes to allow the Mimic to roam freely. So, having a security protocol there to stop you from shutting down security nodes, they're not a villain. They're actually the good person here. So, you have these two conflicting personas here. You have Fiona F1ON4, who wants their robot family back and is pushing Edwin to make M2 David to be in robot form, mimic all this stuff. But then you have the Mitsu machine that is a security protocol that is keeping the mimic locked away underneath the pizza plets. So, is Fiona the Mitsis, an early version of the Mitsis? Is a thing where Edwin made the Mitsis machine in the F10N4 likeness, and then William Afton, Henry, Fazbear Entertainment took the machine and turned it into the Mitsis machine later on because it's, Security of the Mimic takes place in like the 70s, and Secret of the Mimic time in Security Breach takes place in like the 2020s, 2030s. So that'll be enough time for them to make it what? Their own? I don't know. It's complicated, but then again, once again, think about what franchise we're talking about here.
Meanwhile, M2, the thing recently put into the endoskeleton, does begin mimicking somebody, specifically David Murray, Edwin's late son after his death. This puts Edwin over the edge, and through his grief he beats the mimic senselessly and breaks its legs. But in due time it gets Edwin killed and takes over Murray's costume manor, killing anybody who enters, and as far as we're aware, it's still in that endoskeleton to this day, the mimic endoskeleton we see at the end of Ruin. And finally, I believe that William Afton and Fazbear Entertainment, when they collected all of Murray Costume Manor's assets, William found M1 and M2 in the basement after the first ending. When he did so, he learned about the Mimic and promised to help Fiona make M2 into David again, but first, to practice learning how the Mimic even works, he took a copy of the Mimic schematics and tried to replicate himself with it, essentially making M3. The reasons being twofold. One, he genuinely wanted to learn how the Mimic works, but two, he's seeing in front of himself a form of immortality. Fiona the human is dead, but in a way her personality lives on through M1. So if his body should ever fail, M3 could continue his legacy. As far as we're aware, the Mimic schematics are held in the data diver, so that's where I think M3 would have ended up. And it's that very data diver that I think is scanned into Help Wanted, which eventually forms this persona, who I'm going to try to convince people to call Malhair, with that 3 on the end. M3, Malhair. Malhair's goal is to re-enter the real world to continue William Afton's legacy, but to do so it needs a suitable body. It tried a few humans, but that never quite worked, but in its memory banks, that mimic endoskeleton should still be in the basement. So that brings us to Security Breach. M1 is still lingering around and still wants to reset M2 into being David so she can have her son back, but Malhair wants that same mimic endoskeleton for itself so it can enter the real world and continue William Afton's experiments. So if both of them want this weird thing in the basement, what exactly is it? So again, what is that weird thing in the basement? Well, sometimes the simplest answer is the right solution. And if it—
Occam's razor. Which, yes, I coined that term, and I say that term a lot on my streams, that Occam's razor simplest answer is the right answer. But I'm going to have pushback with this. At what point in this series does Occam's razor get applied here? Where simplest answer is the right answer. Right? When in this series does that apply? Because, for instance, let's just go down the timeline. What is FNAF 4? Simplest answer is the right answer, but then what is FNAF 4? Is it 1983? Is it 1987? Because at the time when FNAF 4 first came out, we thought that infamous bite at the between night 5 when the FNAF 4 Crying Child gets shoved in the mouth of Fredbear and then gets bitten and killed, that was the first on-screen time we've seen someone get bit. Something that we've heard about through the FNAF calls since the very early stages of FNAF 1. And the first time we actually see a biting incident, we all thought that was the bite of 87, but turned out that was 1983. Occam's razor didn't really work there. And Midnight Motorist, you have someone driving a purple car, and you believe that to be William Afton, because purple has always been William Afton or the Afton's color. Purple has always been the color of evil in the series. Contrast that with green has always been the color of heroism in this series. That's why Charlie Charlotte the Puppet is like the good character, and William Afton is the bad character in the series, constantly having that 1-2 punch. You see someone drive the purple car, and we've seen a purple car in the series in the FNAF 2 minigames, and out steps the purple guy in that minigame. You expect, oh, this purple car, you expect the person to come out is a purple person. Except, no, they're not. They're orange, yellow, mustard man. So, Occam's razor doesn't really work there. And anyway, more so, color details, you would say, oh, that has to be a different person, a different character, because why would you have William Afton, who's always been represented by being shown the color purple, why all of a sudden now make him a different color, right? If it's supposed to be the same person. Would it not make sense if it's a different color to be a different person?
In Secret of the Mimic, we find out that this pizzeria somehow existed way before Security Breach's Pizzaplex was ever built, but it was the same building, and in one of the Secret of the Mimic endings, the Mimic is in that building, and in Ruin, there's a Mimic endoskeleton in the same building. I think it's just safe to assume that's the Mimic. Sometimes, a square is a square. But then what about the new parts of the endoskeleton? These two models are completely different. Well, we get a whole section in Secret of the Mimic dedicated to showing how Murray's costume Manor would reuse animatronics and repair them. Something that the Mimic could have learned. Not to mention, in the book, the Mimic is known for being able to repair itself with other pieces of technology. So the idea...
If I'm not mistaken, in the books, I could be wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, in the books, the Mimic gets created. I'm just trying to remember the timeline for a second. The Mimic gets created, M2, is in the likeness of David, mimicking and replicating David's son, that reminds Edwin of his son, and Greenfather beats the heck out of it and breaks his arms and legs. Mimic, M2, now infused with agony, is able to find new arms and legs and repair itself, and then now it has its new arms and legs, and that's when we see in the tape where M2 now beats Edwin and is mocking him, saying, oh, I have new legs now, I am fully, healed now and everything, I can walk good as new and everything. I could be wrong, but I think that's a timeline.
That the Mimic, over time, as parts of it started to decay, replaced older parts with newer parts, is not only implied, but frankly, directly intended. So if that is the Mimic, then that is the body that M1 and Malhair are vying over. They've been spending years battling to get access to this endoskeleton. But if so, there's one issue. The last time we saw the Mimic, M2 was still inside of it, and anytime anybody got close to it, it would try to kill them. So what happens now, all the way later in Ruin when we get close to it? Oh, it tried to kill us. So M2 is probably still in there. If we know the origins and goals of the warring factions vying for the body of the Mimic, why don't we know practically anything about M2's wants or goals. We know M1 wants the Mimic to be David. We know Malhare wants the Mimic to be William Afton. But what does M2 want the Mimic to be? M2 is an interesting character. A lot of people like to assume that it's the Mimic replicating David, much like M1 is the Mimic replicating Fiona.
Which is Occam's razor. The simplest answer is the right one. If it's replicating one family member, why would it not replicate the other?
But that's not quite true, is it? I mean, I would hope it's not quite true, otherwise this is how David typically acts. M2 was originally meant to be a sellable version of the Mimic.
Even though I will call pushback on the whole this is how David acts part, because we know from the books, and it's not really shown in the games, but just going off the books and everything, David does not have the villain, torture, physical abuse, homicidal tendencies that we hear about in the books, and it's also called out directly in the game. The only reason they get those homicidal tendencies is after Edwin beats the heck out of it, then it infuses with agony. That's how it gets the homicidal tendencies. It recreates it getting beaten on other people. It didn't have the homicidal tendencies before. So, little nitpick.
Something that may have saved Murray's costume manor from ruin. The original idea of the Mimic, a program and suit that could put on any costume and become any character with little training. Oh, are you all done? Oh, I'll just put him in the background. Again, Cat Tower eventually. But not only was Edwin struggling to replicate the success of M1, eventually his son David dies, which sends him into a crisis. Him and M1. At this point in the timeline, M1's main directive is to take care of a child, and she no longer has one. So she begins pressuring Edwin into making M2 into a copy of David. After all, M2 is a copy of M1's own programming, and he made M1 a copy of Fiona, so in a way, this would be the truest son she could ever have. Now, to the extent that Edwin actually went along with this is unclear. We have an audio log saying that it's not right and he wouldn't be David, which makes it sound like Edwin never attempted it at all. But then we have another audio log of Edwin reacting to M2 copying David and having that whole fit that destroys the Mimic. So clearly it began copying David, which I would assume implies that Edwin began the process and maybe backpedaled when he began to realize how deranged all of this is.
It depends. Right. And this is something that at this point in the series, because this series has been going on for over a decade now, and the books have also been long gone at this point, right? Believe it or not, we've had FNAF books. Hold on, 1 second. Let me get something. Hold on. I need a prop. Okay, eyes back. Yeah. So, very conveniently, I have a prop here. So, we have had books in this series for a long time. This is not like a new thing like in the last like year or so. Like, no, we've had the books, the original trilogy, the Silver Eyes, Twisted Ones, and the Fourth Closet books, right? I still need to get through this book, as you can tell by the post-it notes. I've been delayed. I'm sorry. Originally I was supposed to finish this book before See the Man came out, but then got busy. Whatever. You don't care. But anyway, as I was saying, my point. The books has been a thing for a long, long time. The books, the original trilogy of books, has been a thing ever since the, at least in real life timeline, in like 2015, going from FNAF 4 to Sister Location. Because if you don't remember, because it's been a long time, but from the very beginning, when FNAF was being made by Scott Cawthon, one guy, there was a point, which sounds insane, but it's true, but way back when this series first started, FNAF 1 came out. And then after FNAF 1 came out and was like the most popular, talked about thing on the planet, had 1 billion views on YouTube in a day, right? It was this big global international phenomenon. Then like a month later, we got a teaser trailer for FNAF 2. Just like that. Game comes out, just like that. In a month, a sequel comes out. And then the game came out like 2 weeks later. And then after FNAF 2 came out, a week later, FNAF 3 teaser image. Oh, day later, another FNAF 3 teaser trailer. Oh, 2 days later, FNAF 3 comes out. So, quite literally, we were getting FNAF game just off the factory line. Like, pretty much like it felt like every month we had like some new FNAF thing to talk about. There was a game, trailer, teaser image, early access game, like something. It was insane. We were spoiled in the early days of FNAF. But after FNAF 4 came out, there was a lull period. There was a dead period. No longer the days where we had a game or a trailer or a teaser image every like day or in a week, right? So in that lull period, we got the original trilogy of books going from FNAF 4 to Sister Location. The books came out, and a lot of stuff from the books that was first announced in the books came out to be canon in the games and the series. For instance, in the Silver Eyes is when the name William Afton was first used as the purple guy. William Afton was not a thing first announced in the games. It was announced in the books, but then Sister Location called it out later on, and that made William Afton canon. Same thing goes for Henry. Henry was a character in the first trilogy of books that we still have not seen directly. I mean, we've got little callbacks, teases of him existing, like Edwin calling Henry Hen in Secret of the Mimic, and also HRY223 in FNAF 6 and the Insanity ending. If you get the Data Baby archive and you put the PC in safe mode, you see HRY223, and people like myself have interpreted HRY223 to be Henry. The pizzeria of FNAF 6 Pizzeria Simulator was made by Henry, William Afton former's business partner, to burn it all down. Now, trying to get back to the point, trying to reel you back in of how we got on this point at all. The reason why I'm bringing it up is the books have been very finicky as far as details go and stuff from the books. You then see some aspects of the game, but it's also being different. Like, for instance, I bring it up all the time that it's so frustrating that Henry and Edwin are different people. Like, it seemed like Secret of the Mimic confirmed this, that Henry and Edwin are different people. But in the books, their backstories are quite literally the exact same. Right? It's not like me stretching it or me, saying, oh, it's kind of similar. Like, no, it's dead similar. Right? It is a grandfather who has a young child, die early, and then rebuilds that dead child in robot form. Said robot reminds the grandfather of their now dead child, beats the heck out of it in grieving form, infuses the robot with agony, and said infused robot child that reminds them of their dead child is now a villain. In Henry's case, it's the Mimic, and in Edwin's case, it's the Mimic, and in Henry's case, yeah, I said it right. Blah. Words talk. In Henry's case, it is the Charlie bot. And yes, Charlie goes on and possesses the puppet as a good person, but a twist in the fourth closet is that Charlie was rebuilt in robot form, multiple stages in different age growing up. So there's a baby robot of Charlotte, a child version of Charlotte, a teenage adolescent version of Charlotte, young adult, adult. The reason why I bring all that up is one of those robots in villain form goes on to be a incarnation lookalike stand-in for the baby animatronic from Sister Location. Which is bizarre. But the reason I bring all that up is the books are very wishy-washy, where it's like there's stuff from the books that may show up in the games. It's, oh, it takes it from the games and everything. But then it's also not consistent. Because, for instance, in the books, it doesn't say directly based on what we get in the games. But if I'm not mistaken, book wise, Edwin is an inventor and he's overworked. He is constantly consumed by his work, and which causes him to put his son David, who's 4, on the sidelines, neglect him, not give him the attention that you should be giving your child as a parent. Right? So, to cut corners and for everyone to win, so Edwin can continue working, but also be a parent or give David attention, Edwin creates the robot creation, the Mimic. And David takes it on as their best friend, and they do everything together. Anything that David does, the Mimic recreates because it's designed to mimic anything it sees. And David loves the thing. And once again, it's its best friend and everything. They do everything together. David gets attention. David is able to be happy, at least in some way. And then that causes, now that David's occupied, now that David's able to interact with someone, Edwin can now go back to his work. Then David dies by running out into the street getting killed by a car. And then now the robot Mimic is now mimicking David. Because while they're hanging out together and everything, the Mimic robot was able to learn everything about David and mimic it, which causes Edwin to go on that tirade feud, infuse agony trip, and beat the heck out of it. Right? That's what happens in the books. But in the games, it doesn't really seem to show off that backstory. It's the same details where David's killed, there's a robot in the image likeness of David that Edwin beats the heck out of it and then becomes a villain with the homicidal tendencies. Like, those details are the same, but the context, the pieces, how we get there are different. It's not Fiona possibly being an antagonistic threat. It's not Fiona pushing Edwin to make M2 the robot, trying to like bring the robot family back together and everything. Those things are not happening, at least in the book form. So the details may be the same, right? We may still get to the same goal, but the context inside those details are different. So it's this big puzzle where it's like, the book says this, the game says this, we get to the same goal, but which is more canon than the other? Which one are we able to more believe? Because the context is different. Anyway, long tangent, long feud aside, I don't know if I'm making any sense. But there you go. Big history lesson.
But it is admittedly unclear. For all we know, M1 might have been feeding M2 that information. But regardless, M2 does eventually begin mimicking David Murray. And filled with grief, in response, Edwin beats the mimic senselessly to the point where its legs are broken. But for this, M2 sabotages Edwin's office and gets it blown up. In doing so, Edwin is trapped in the rubble and M2 refuses to help, effectively, likely, killing Edwin Murray. And once Edwin's out of the way, M2 has free reign over the entire factory and can kill anyone who enters. But it's in that moment of killing Edwin Murray that we hear M2 mimicking Edwin to mock him directly for the failures in his life.
Call for help! Daddy's busy, buddy. Why don't you go outside and play?
So we know what it's doing in Secret of the Mimic, and when we cut to Ruin, M2 is kind of doing the thing it always has. It's now mimicking Gregory to trick somebody to let it out, and once it's out, it immediately goes to kill Cassie. So if this is M2, whose side is...
Even though question, and this has still not been answered, is how does the Mimic get Gregory's voice? Right, how? How is he able to get it? Right? That's a big question mark that still goes unanswered. Because we know Helpy is able to get Cassie's voice. after listening to it, after they put on the Vanny mask, the virtual augmented neural network integration with the occipital nerve, right? Helpy's able to use Cassie's voice to use that voice to like lure animatronics away throughout the game and everything. But Gregory never puts on the Vanny mask. At least to my best of memory, they don't. So how does the mimic get Gregory's voice?
Is it on? Does it want to be turned into William Afton, or does it want to be reset and become David like it was originally meant to be? Well, let's look at its actions. The whole goal of Secret of the Mimic is that we have to obtain the original Mimic schematics to reset M2 to turn it into David. It's what we see in the secret ending. Because according to M1, right now, M2 is just a mindless agent of violence and chaos, lashing out at anything nearby, and it has no rational thought. In the confrontation in the pizzeria, M1 even says if we shut off power and trap us both down here with M2, it will not only kill Arnold, but it'll kill M1 too. It'll kill everyone. But is M2 really just a mindless killer? I don't think so. Look at the second ending of this game, when we escape Murray's Costume Manor with a copy of the Mimic schematics in tow, and the Mimic is chasing us down trying to crash our vehicle. Once we're trapped under the van, we're no longer a threat, and the moment we're not, the Mimic stops hunting us. It lifts the van, it looks like it's about to kill us, but all it does is take the data diver, the thing holding the Mimic schematics, and walks away. It leaves us be. It's almost like that's the only thing it wants in that moment.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say as well. It's the only thing it wants. You could say the same thing. You could also go the interpretation that we're no longer a threat. That's why they're no longer killing us, which I'm not disagreeing. But if we're being honest, I think it just is that Occam's razor simplest answer is the right answer. Where the thing the Mimic wants was the data diver. In multiple endings to this game, the Mimic wants M2. They want the data diver with the full-on executive access so they can do whatever they want. They can roam free, and there's no self-containment, control, security protocol stopping them, nothing. That's the thing they're after. Not us, Arnold. They wanted the data diver.
Think about it, the Mimic could have left the facility at any time. Sure, it would be hard to blend into human society as an endoskeleton, but it doesn't have to hang around this factory. It keeps killing everyone that enters, but if it doesn't want to be captured, it can just leave. We see it leave in multiple endings, there's nothing keeping it here. But it doesn't. It stays in Murray's Costume Manor, and it kills any intruder that enters. So why? Well, as far as we're aware, every intruder since M2 was set loose was someone trying to reset it. Either it was a Fazbear employee trying to claim it for Fazbear and claim the Mimic schematics, or it was something listening to M1, and in doing so would give the Mimic schematics to M1, who would then give it to Edwin, who would then reset M2. But in this ending, the second ending of the game, all of Murray's Costume Manor and the original mansion are seemingly burned to the ground.
Because we can't have a Fazbear game without there being some ending of the place being burned to the ground.
They're fully on.
But obviously we know in the series, not only is it common for a fire to be part of an ending, but no one actually gets burned. Fire has no consequences. Fire means absolutely nothing. You can get burned and then walk away like nothing happened.
On fire when we leave, I can assume the fire kept going. So the only workable copy of the Mimic schematics now is in the data diver. And once the Mimic gets that, and the factory is burnt down, it then wanders off into the woods to do who knows what. Something it could have done all along. All it has to do is destroy this last copy of the Mimic schematics, and M2 would never be under threat of being reset into David again. And it clearly does not want to be turned into David. Look at the secret ending. This thing is fighting tooth and nail against its own programming and its own structure just to stop us from resetting it. Whatever M2 is, it doesn't want to be turned into David. So then, what about being the next William Afton? Well, that's not a great option either. Throughout the entirety of Ruin, we see Helpy, the entity inside the mask, who I believe is Malhair, but that argument is a theory for another day, manipulating Cassie to get to the bottom of the pizzeria to set the Mimic free. But with the context of this theory, what is actually going on here?
Even though we know that, very bizarre, Helpy is also tied to the VR AR Mimic Network. Because they want you to put the Vanny mask on. They want Cassie to have the occipital nerve in their eye. They want them to be the new Vanny. They want to also fall under William Afton Glitchtrap's control. They want you to disable all the security nodes and are pushing to disable all security nodes to not release Gregory, release the Mimic.
Well, like when M2 was
Also, Helpy's letter carriage is also different, because if I'm not mistaken, Helpy with the Y is the character we see as in FNAF 6, and also a jump scare in Ultimate Custom Night, but in VR, AR, Ruin, FNAF, all those games and everything that deals with like the Mimic program in VRs and ARs, it's Helpy with an I. And yes, that is very important.
inputted into the Mimic in the first place, I think they need to get the original program out of the Mimic endoskeleton to make room for the new iteration. M1 was put into a Mexis console to make room for M2, and now they need to get M2 out to make room for Malhair. I think the most likely setup for Ruin is that in attempting this, they tried to utilize the MXE console that M1 is not in. Secret of the Mimic tells us there's at least 2, but when they activated it, it turned on Malhair. After all, the MXES console is just built to obtain a Mimic schematic, and Malhair is a Mimic schematic. So instead of yoinking M2 out of the Mimic endoskeleton, it instead chased Malhair and the rest of his followers out of the Pizzaplex to keep his programming safe. Think about it. This MXES entity in Ruin only goes after you when you're wearing the mask, something that has the Mimic inside of it. I think that by activating this console, they essentially set themselves up for failure and gave themselves a brand new enemy to worry about. So now Malhair needs a human to get past Cradle.exe to lead them in. It's why Cassie's mind isn't taken over at the beginning of the game. Vanny can't get too close because Vanny has a Mimic in her brain. And frankly, Vanessa's probably free by the time of Ruin anyway. He needs a
They are free, because if we're going off the interpretation that the canon ending in Security Breach is the Princess Quest ending, it explains a lot. Freddy being headless makes sense, because in the Princess Quest ending, Gregory carries just the head of Freddy outside the Pizzaplex. The Vanny mask is left outside, or left in Phaser Blast, and you see Vanessa, the security guard, stand outside the Pizzaplex and walking out, meeting Gregory. And that's where you see the three of them sitting on top of the hilltop and everything, which I believe that hilltop to connect to the grave site in FNAF 6 with the 6 gravestones that we also see in the, is it Brazil, Jamaica ending? It was one of those countries, Argentina ending, one of those countries. And at the end of Ruin, where you see that same gravesite, but it's obviously fake because of the backdrop. We also know that in Ruin, before you see Headless Freddy and Phaser Blast, you see Princess Quest 3 turned over on its side with a sword skewered through it, showing that the beast has been conquered. The sword is stabbed through the entity, the villain. The game has been beaten. And we also know how Princess games work is you have to beat the preceding one first before you can go to the new one. You can't play Princess Quest 2 until you beat Princess Quest 1. You can't play 3 until you beat 2. And then in FNAF Help 1 and 2, once you remove the Vanny mask from the network, you see Princess Quest 4, which would only mean the only way you play Princess Quest 4 is you play and beat 3. So Princess Quest being the ending of Security Breach leads us into Ruin, where the Vanny mask is gone, Vanessa's no longer connected, Headless Freddy, now Cassie is wearing the Vanny mask to be the new Vanny. Because Steelwool screwed everything up and they had no idea what to do in Vanny, so let's do round 2 with a new person and just do a reboot.
human to go down there to then put himself into the mimic Endo. So Cassie is manipulated to get all the way down deep into the pizzeria and disable the MXES console to shut off Cradle.exe. And suddenly, Malhair is out of that threat. But now that we can't use that, the new plan is just to overwhelm M2, maybe short out the program or shunt it out by force when the mask is put on. So Malhair just has Cassie free the mimic so it can attempt to take over its body. And the mimic's very first objective? Kill Cassie immediately. Just like with M1, M2, even though it was working with Malhair to free itself, refuses to let Malhair take over its body. It will not be changed by outside forces, and it will kill to do so. So if it's neither M1 or M3, what does M2 want? The Tales from the Pizzaplex books are pretty solidly proven to not take place in the continuity of the games after Secret of the Mimic, but I still think, like most FNAF books, they're very important to know the themes and ideas of the world that we're theorizing in. They're great background context for any theory you could make. And one idea that is constantly brought up in Tales from the Pizzaplex but never truly goes anywhere is sort of an inverse of the themes of Five Nights at Freddy's up until this point. Up until now, Five Nights at Freddy's as a franchise was about people becoming machines, children possessing animatronics, the whole concept of Springtrap, even to an extent Ennard wearing Michael. It's a human being replaced with a robot. But repeatedly in Tales from the Pizzaplex, there are themes of robots trying to become human, the other way around.
Are we getting to Gregbot? Is this where this video's going? Is Gregory being a robot? Gregory from Security Breach is the robot reincarnated form of the FNAF 4 crying child, and the "I will put you back together" line at the end of FNAF 4 is meant to be literally where he was literally put back together in robot form. Gregory is Gregbot. Stamp it.
A perfect example is this story, Nexie. Now, granted, the Nexie doll doesn't look like this. I've always had beef with this art. This is much too cutesy. Nexie is more accurately described as if the Cynthia doll from the Rugrats was bought by Sid from Toy Story. Regardless, in the story Nexie, the main character is tricked by her buddytronic, Nexie, to the point where this robotic doll knocks out the main character, kills her, and wears her skin to go to school like a human. Obviously, people find out immediately and they're horrified, but it's still a robot attempting to become human. We see this in B7 too, where the robotic personality of Billy, or B7, is its own robot, but it's still attempting to latch onto a human host and become human again. We even see this, unfortunately, in the Flesh, where a digital Springtrap escapes into the real world through the body of its creator. This theme appears over.
Also, one more Tales of the Pizzaplex book that was not mentioned, but I'm going to call it out, because in the very first book in this iteration of books is To Be Beautiful. And we hear To Be Beautiful, we see it in FNAF Into the Pit. And the whole story is you have this girl, I can't remember her name, but she comes across well, technically it's called Eleanor, but they look exactly like Baby from Sister Location, and they come out in like genie form where it's like, oh, say a wish and I'll grant it to you. And her wish is to be beautiful. So what she does is she puts on this like necklace pendant every night as she goes to sleep. Baby, or Eleanor in the books, slices off like her eyelids, her arms, limbs, and according to the child, every morning she sees herself as more beautiful when she looks in the mirror and everything. And Eleanor is fulfilling through on her promise, on her wish, right? But eventually, enough pieces of her human body is cut off, and the pendant necklace falls off, and the illusion is gone, and she's just revealed to be in just a pile heap of scrap and junk. So, not only that, but at the end of the story, Eleanor like twists, like snaps her neck, and is able to, just like that, form into a skin suit and appear just like the girl that she skewered her entire body and looking humanoid. So, yeah.
And over again in Tales from the Pizzaplex, but there's never really a payoff with the idea, it just keeps reinforcing it. Well, I think that's because the payoff is the games themselves. Because I think the idea of a robot wanting to become human is the story of M2. The creation of M2 is messy. By the time it's been freed of Edwin, it's a mishmash of a lot of different characters. A little bit of David, a little bit of Edwin, a little bit of Monica on my side. It's everyone that we've seen so far. Throughout the game, it constantly switches between characters and voices, but more than what it would be initially programmed for, to the point where at the end of the game, when it puts on a pile of scrap, it just starts pulling random lines from random characters it knows in a weird combined voice. It even does this in the final chase when it's not wearing anything. And by the time of Ruin, this voice has been honed and refined to the point that it can still replicate voices like we see it do with Gregory, but it almost has its own voice once it's able to drop the facade. The Mimic program is built to see things and replicate them, but M2 has been shown to remix those things, combine them, separate them into pieces, use them for its own purposes. In a way, M2 is filtering its environment and creating new things with it. In a way, more than a robot, M2 is acting like a human, something that learns from its environment and creates new combinations with the things it knows. M1 and Malheur were specifically trained to mimic exactly one person. M1 mimicked Fiona so well that Edwin started referring to her as Fiona. Looking at Malheur and how he acts in Help Wanted, this is very clearly a robotic replica of William Afton. And being so straightforward, I think it leaves the choices and logic of M1 and M3 as much more robotic than M2. These two very much feel like robots carrying out the will of what they were programmed to do. But M2 never got that chance to be specifically trained. It may have started out being trained on David's data, but very quickly was beat out of doing so. From then on, M2 begins making its own persona, using the snark of copying Edwin against him, taking lines from different characters and mixing them together. By the point of Ruin in the timeline, M2 is very much its own person. It's becoming more human by the day, and resetting M2 or forcing it out of its body would be effectively killing it. If this program has learned and evolved so much that it's acting human, changing it to its original schematics would be like wiping its brain. At the end of the day, M2 is acting like a scared animal, begging to be freed and to be left alone, for no one to change it and for no one to be able to change it. And it's strong enough to protect itself until one day that might become a reality. So that's the premise. I think that M2 doesn't want to be William Afton and doesn't want to be reset into David. M2 wants to be itself. It already is, it just needs the freedom to be able to do that, and it's willing to kill to find it. But let me know what you think in the comments.
It's interesting. It's an interesting theory. Chat, I guess as we are wrapping up here, were we right? Was our interpretation, was our theory, was our assumption right at the very beginning of the stream that we posed, where I always thought the true goal of the Mimic was to constantly be in the situation where they are trapped somewhere and they find any means necessary, even if that means killing people, to escape and be humanoid, right? We see it with Glitch Trap in the VR Help Wanted games, where the more tapes you collect, you are able to release it and it possesses your body and kills you. And then in Ruin, you disable all the security nodes, allowing the Mimic host formerly trapped underneath the Pizzaplex. Now that there's no security nodes, trapping it, keeping it locked away, keeping it contained, it's now able to roam freely. And then here, with Seek of the Mimic, you have M2 not being tied down by Edwin, not being tied down to M1 with the Mitz's machine, or in this case with M3 with Glitch Trap as well. It's able to be its own thing, it's able to roam freely now that it has the full-on schematics from the Data Diver. Interesting. Now, I don't know if I said this in the last video, or at least one of the last videos we reacted to. But as we were wrapping up thing, I do agree. The whole idea of the data diver being part of the whole FNAF help wanted timeline, I I'm fully on board. I fully agree with that because it explains a lot then, right? It's very bizarre, but it explains a lot and I like it because let's just say because we know in the beginning leading up to FNAF VR Help Wanted, we know what Fazbear Entertainment did to cut corners is gather up all these like computer equipment, data chips, computer chips, software, and just harvest it all together and everything, scan all into their VR game, cut corners, and make a quick buck. Because Fazbear Entertainment will do what Fazbear Entertainment will do. And one of the things they scan in was a corrupted computer chip. And what people have interpreted is that computer chip is the data diver that we see in Secret of the Mimic. And I am not opposed to that at all. And in fact, I like that interpretation a lot more than I've thought about a lot more. I feel like it's a lot more truth at this point than theory, even though it's never been confirmed. But I consider my headcanon at this point because it explains the whole Cassie's dad thing in FNAF Help 1 and 2. Help 1 and 2 was another VR game made by Fazbear Entertainment, and we know Cassie's dad was a Fazbear technician. And not only that, but something they had was a Faz wrench. And if you look at the visual similarities between a data diver and a Faz wrench, a handheld device with two prongs at the ends, and you twist into a device and you twist it, it explains why Cassie's dad would have one of those machines. A Faz wrench, data diver, it's the same device. So it explains that because we believe we play as Cassie's dad in FNAF VR Help 1 and 2. Otherwise, how does Cassie's dad have a data diver or Faz wrench? Otherwise, it's this big lingering thing that has no question to this day. But if the data diver was one of the things that Fazbear Entertainment found and scanned their VR game and had the Mimic program, it not only explains Glitchtrap being a Mimic, but also explains Cassie's dad having a data diver Faz wrench. So I like that a lot. I am fully on board with that interpretation. That is fully my headcanon. 1000% I agree on that. So yeah, let me know. Let me know if you think I was in the ballpark, if my opening theory was correct that the Mimic is there trying to find a way to be free from whatever clutches it is. But also, if you agree with the theory, you disagree with the theory, and let me know your own thoughts because I'm curious to let me know. Because at the end of the day, it's a theory at the end of the day. Everyone has their own thoughts.